Can you explain a caloric deficit and a caloric surplus? And how we should be eating to burn fat, retain energy, and build muscle? So, first, let's talk about calories. A calorie is actually the amount of energy required to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. And the amount of calories inside of a substance is actually tested in what's referred to as a bomb calorimeter, which through a series of calculations can determine the amount of calories inside of a food. And now, technically, the body does not actually run on calories. When we consume food, it's either turned into energy in the form of ATP, which is a small molecule used to power every single function inside of the body. And any extra food that we eat that isn't turned into ATP can be stored in the form of muscle and liver glycogen. Storage forms of protein include muscle and different bodily structures. And any excess that isn't stored like this is turned into body fat. With that being said, the use of calories is just a simple way to try and equate the amount of food that we eat with the amount of energy that we expend. And we can equate the amount of calories that we expend, such as burning 2,000 calories, with the amount of calories that we consume. And if you consume more calories than you expend, you will begin to gain weight, and this is referred to as a caloric surplus. And if you consume less calories than you expend, it's referred to as a caloric deficit. There are many different factors that play into our caloric expenditure, including our activity levels, our baseline metabolism, and even the amount of energy that it takes to digest our food. And there are actually many things that go into our caloric intake, including the amount of food that we eat and the amount of food that is actually digested and absorbed. And now it is absolutely true that the only way to gain weight is to be in a caloric surplus. And the only way to lose weight is to be in a caloric deficit. But I'm being very careful about my words. I'm not saying fat, I'm saying weight. For example, if you only ate 1,000 calories, you would lose weight. But if the only thing that you consumed to get this 1,000 calories was Gatorade, then a large proportion of the weight that you lose would likely come in the form of muscle. Because Gatorade contains virtually 0 grams of protein, and protein is the dietary factor that allows us to build or retain muscle. But let's say you ate 1,000 calories of eggs, fish, and berries. You would lose weight and you'd still lose a small proportion of muscle, but you'd probably lose a much larger proportion of body fat. With that being said, at the end of the day, you'd probably lose the same amount of weight. The only thing that changes is the composition of the weight that you lose. On the other hand, you can eat as perfectly as you want. But if you eat in a large caloric surplus, there's only so much of that excess energy that can go to building muscle, and the rest will go to storing body fat. Therefore, if you ate 5,000 calories of the most nutritious food, you would still gain body fat. However, you might gain slightly less body fat and slightly more muscle than someone who is consuming 5,000 calories of candy and chips. So at the end of the day, you probably gain the same amount of weight. However, the composition of that weight might be more favorable the more nutritious your diet. Additionally, other health metrics that are just as important, such as quality of life, lifespan, energy levels, and the mitigation of diseases such as diabetes and high blood pressure, you would likely have more favorable outcomes if you were consuming a more nutritious diet, whether you're in a caloric surplus or a caloric deficit. At the end of the day, it's almost virtually impossible to know your exact caloric intake and exact caloric expenditure, but we can do a fairly good job of approximating this. And there are many factors that actually influence the amount of energy that you expend. For example, if you were consuming a very low-calorie diet of mostly processed junk food, you'd likely feel a lot worse and you'd probably move a lot less. So your caloric expenditure may decline. And with this means the magnitude of your caloric deficit is also reduced. Not because calories don't actually matter, but because certain foods can actually alter your caloric expenditure. I think the main takeaway here is that calories absolutely matter for the fluctuations in body weight. But the quality of food may impact quality of life and composition of weight lost or gained. Therefore, both things are important, and you probably don't want to be neglecting either. And to give yourself the best chance of losing fat and gaining muscle, you might want to aim for a very minor caloric deficit, but also make sure you're prioritizing micronutrients, protein, and exercise, specifically weight training. And if you want to learn how to do this, send me a DM to sign up for coaching.